The Zorath had long been the rulers of their sector, feared and respected by all other species for their unmatched technology and ruthless expansion. For centuries, they had dominated the stars, conquering planets and bending entire civilizations to their will. Their warships were vast, their weapons devastating, and their intelligence systems flawless. Nothing in the galaxy could challenge them, until now. One quiet day, a strange transmission reached the Zorath fleet. It came from an uncharted star system, a place far from any known human territory. The transmission was brief but alarming. A single human warship, the USS Vanguard, had entered Zorath space. No demands, no threats, just a silent arrival, uninvited. The Zorath, ever cautious, decided to investigate this human vessel. They were curious but not overly concerned. Humans were known to be primitive, their technology far behind the Zorath's own. The alien fleet began their long-range scans, expecting to see a poorly equipped ship, maybe a scout or a desperate colony ship. But what they found shocked them to the core. The USS Vanguard was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It wasn't just a ship, it was a fortress. Thick, reinforced armor protected it from any known weaponry, and the energy readings from the ship's core were off the charts. The ship's structure was vast, sprawling, and heavily fortified, with strange designs and features that defied logic. As the Zorath analyzed the data further, their unease grew. This was no ordinary human vessel. The US Vanguard was bristling with weaponry, energy cannons, missile systems, and defense shields that could rival the most advanced Zorath designs. But it wasn't just the technology that puzzled them, it was the ship's presence. The US Vanguard wasn't just a machine, it felt alive, as if it were a part of something much bigger. A force that had been forged through years of struggle and survival. This was not the kind of ship they expected from a species like humans. The Zorath Council, composed of the most powerful and experienced leaders of their race, immediately convened to discuss what they had discovered. The room was filled with a tense silence as they reviewed the scans again, each of them trying to comprehend what they were seeing. One by one, the leaders spoke, their voices filled with a mix of awe and fear. How could this be? How could such a small, seemingly insignificant species possess such power? The Zorath had always seen themselves as the superior race, the masters of the galaxy. They had crushed every opposition they encountered with ease. But now there was a strange, unsettling feeling creeping into the minds of the Council. The humans, a species they had once considered primitive, were showing signs of something much more dangerous: intelligence, innovation, and resilience. The Zorath had never felt fear before, but now, for the first time in their history, they were unsure of what to expect. As the Council debated their next move, a sense of dread began to settle over them. The US Vanguard was not just a ship, it was a symbol of a species that had survived against all odds and could be far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. They needed more information. They needed to understand the true capabilities of this human warship. But as they prepared to send out additional probes, an unsettling thought gnawed at the back of their minds. What if the humans had already known about them? What if this was no accident? The US Vanguard had entered their space, and the Zorath were about to discover just how dangerous an underestimated enemy could truly be. As the Zorath continued their deep scans of the US Vanguard, something strange began to unfold. Their probes, designed to detect everything from energy signatures to hidden weaponry, were met with resistance. It was as if the ship was anticipating their every move, shifting its systems just out of reach of their probing instruments. The Zorath had never encountered anything quite like this. They had expected to find a primitive, perhaps outdated ship, something they could easily overpower, but instead, they were facing a puzzle that they couldn't quite solve. Suddenly, their monitors lit up with a new signal, a broadcast from the human vessel. The transmission was encrypted, but not enough to hide its source. With a low hum, the signal began to unravel, revealing the unmistakable voice of the human captain. A seasoned officer, her tone calm and unwavering, she addressed the Zorath directly. "To whom it may concern, Her voice echoed across the Zorath command decks, clear and measured. "We come in peace, but be warned. If we are attacked, we will defend ourselves, and you will not survive." The words hung in the air like a warning bell, resonating deeply in the minds of the Zorath leaders. They had expected the humans to cower, to beg for mercy, or perhaps try to explain their way out of the situation. But instead, this Captain Elara Rhodes, a name that was now etched into the Zorath's collective consciousness, spoke with a quiet confidence that only deepened their unease. How could this be? How could a species so young, so seemingly insignificant in the grand scale of the galaxy, possess such strength, such audacity? The Zorath had faced countless civilizations, conquered powerful empires, and erased entire races from existence, yet none had ever dared to speak to them in such a way. There was something different about the humans, something unsettling in their calmness, in their absolute certainty that they were capable of taking on the might of the Zorath. The fear that the Zorath leaders had only begun to feel now spread like wildfire. The human warship wasn't just a ship, it was a statement. The Zorath had long seen themselves as the most advanced race in the galaxy, the pinnacle of evolution. But here they were, confronted with a species that had no reason to believe they were inferior. In fact, the humans seemed to have an almost reckless confidence in their own power. That thought alone terrified the Zorath. They began to question everything. Were they truly the most advanced? Had they made a terrible mistake by underestimating this species? In their years of conquest, the Zorath had never encountered anyone with this kind of resilience, this kind of unwavering spirit. It wasn't just the technology aboard the US Vanguard that alarmed them, it was the humans themselves. They have faced other technologically advanced species before, but the humans weren't just using their tech. They were using it in ways that were unpredictable and far more dangerous than the Zorath had ever considered. As the Zorath Council mulled over the message, the implications started to sink in. The humans weren't just looking to survive, they were prepared to fight. And if it came to that, the Zorath would soon find out that this was a fight they might not win. Captain Rhodes had made it clear. There would be no retreat, no surrender. The Zorath had no idea what they were dealing with, but now they knew one thing for sure. If they moved against the humans, they would be facing a threat unlike anything they had ever seen. The question wasn't whether the humans would defend themselves. It was whether the Zorath could withstand the storm they had just awoken. The stakes had shifted. What had started as a simple scan of an uninvited warship was rapidly turning into a dangerous game of strategy and survival, one that neither side fully understood yet. The Zorath would have to choose their next move carefully, for one wrong decision could ignite a war that might cost them everything. The Zorath, determined to learn more about the US Vanguard, decided to send a reconnaissance fleet. The ships, sleek and fast, were equipped with the most advanced scanning technology in the galaxy. As they approached the human warship, they activated their AI systems, designed to analyze every inch of a target. The Zorath expected to find more of the same, the usual signs of human technology that had once seemed so primitive. But what they found was beyond anything they had ever encountered. The US Vanguard was no ordinary ship. Its armor, unlike anything the Zorath had seen, was made of an unknown material, one that resisted all their scans and calculations. It was nearly indestructible, as it had been crafted for one purpose: to withstand anything thrown its way. Every attempt to breach its defensive layers only led to dead ends. The warship seemed impervious to their most sophisticated tools. As they turned their attention to the weapons, the Zorath found something even more unsettling. The US Vanguard's weapon systems were nothing like the standard energy cannons or missile launchers they were used to. The human ship's weaponry was designed with deadly precision. Each system was built not for brute force, but for efficiency, designed to eliminate targets with surgical accuracy. There were no wasteful shots, no flaring energy blasts. Every attack was a calculated strike, a warning that the humans were not just reactive, but proactive in their approach to warfare. But what truly unsettled the Zorath wasn't the technology, it was the humans themselves. The US Vanguard wasn't just a ship filled with advanced technology, it was a war machine manned by humans who were more than capable of operating it. As the Zorath continued their scans, they gained access to detailed records of the crew. What they discovered made the Zorath pause. The humans aboard the warship were not just soldiers. They were veterans, hardened by countless battles and brutal survival situations. Each crew member had been trained not only to fight but to think, plan, and execute in the most extreme circumstances. They were not merely defending their ship, they were living embodiments of strategy and resilience. There were engineers and tacticians, strategists and medics, each of them a specialist in their own right, each a part of the machine that was the USS Vanguard. The Zorath found themselves unable to fully grasp what they were looking at. These humans were unlike any species they had ever encountered. They did not fight like the Zorath's previous enemies, who relied on brute force or predictable tactics. The humans adapted quickly, learning from every battle and using their failures to fuel their success. They could survive in any environment, from the cold vacuum of space to the harshest battlefields. The Zorath's scanners revealed that every member of the crew had been pushed to their absolute limits, trained to think beyond the ordinary, to solve problems in ways that defied conventional logic. What terrified the Zorath most was the realization that the US Vanguard wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of humanity's potential. The humans had built something not through overwhelming power, but through their own ingenuity and adaptability. The Zorath had seen countless empires fall, entire civilizations crushed under the weight of their technology, but this was different. These humans had something the Zorath had never encountered before, an endless capacity to adapt, to learn, and to fight not just for survival, but to win. The Zorath had no choice but to acknowledge the terrifying truth. The humans were not a species to be underestimated. If the US Vanguard was any indication, humanity was capable of more than just surviving. It was capable of thriving in the most hostile environments. The Zorath's sense of superiority, once so absolute, was now shattered. They had a serious problem on their hands, and for the first time in centuries, the Zorath were beginning to realize that they might have met their match. The US Vanguard was no longer just a ship. It was a warning, a declaration of humanity's arrival in the galactic theater. And the Zorath, now fully aware of the danger, couldn't shake the feeling that they had just awakened a force they were not prepared to face. As the Zorath continued their surveillance of the US Vanguard, they began to peel back the layers of human ingenuity, uncovering a truth that shook them to their core. Initially, they had believed the US Vanguard was an isolated threat, a singular ship that had somehow slipped through their radar. But as they dug deeper into their scans, they made a startling discovery. The US Vanguard was part of a much larger fleet, one that spanned multiple sectors of the galaxy. Each warship was a marvel in itself, equipped with self-sustaining technologies that enabled them to operate independently for years without relying on outside resources. Renewable energy systems, powerful shields, and adaptive weapons were just the beginning. The Zorath soon realized that the humans were not just technologically advanced. They had mastered the art of long-term survival in space, creating entire fleets capable of existing in the most hostile environments. This wasn't the work of a single ship or a short-lived campaign. Humanity's entire strategy was built around sustainability and adaptability. The more the Zorath learned, the more they understood how resourceful the humans were. But what truly disturbed them was a skill that went beyond technology. The humans had perfected the art of improvisation, a skill that allowed them to survive, and often thrive, against forces far superior to their own. The US Vanguard was proof of that. It wasn't just the technology that made it a formidable weapon. It was the crew aboard, who could turn any situation to their advantage. The Zorath had observed countless civilizations in their millennia of conquest, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. They had wiped out entire planets, eradicated species with ease, and crushed any resistance they encountered. But the humans were different. Where others had crumbled under the pressure of superior force, the humans had adapted and fought back. Time and again, They had faced impossible odds and found ways to outsmart and outlast their enemies. The Zorath had seen some of the most advanced species in the galaxy fall before their might, but the humans seemed to possess something that set them apart, an unyielding drive to survive. It wasn't just about weapons or technology, it was about a mentality, a relentless spirit that pushed them to find solutions even when none seemed possible. It was as if the humans had an innate understanding of how to turn the tide of battle in their favor, using whatever they had at hand. And that realization left the Zorath uneasy. For the first time in their history, they found themselves questioning whether they had truly understood the full extent of the threat humanity posed. The US Vanguard wasn't just a military ship, it was a symbol of the human spirit, one that could not be easily crushed or intimidated. The more the Zorath analyzed the data, the more questions arose. How could a species with so little time in space possess such deep reserves of strength? How had they managed to develop not just the tools of war, but the very mindset that allowed them to outlast their enemies? Every moment spent studying the US Vanguard only deepened the mystery. The humans had clearly learned from every encounter, every battle, and every loss, and had woven those lessons into their very being. The Zorath, once certain of their dominance, now faced an unknown. They were used to dealing with predictable enemies, civilizations that could be broken, subdued, and conquered. But the humans had no such predictable pattern. They were erratic, adaptable, and most terrifying of all, unpredictable. Every scan, every analysis of the US Vanguard only seemed to reveal more depth, more complexity, and more potential danger. The Zorath knew they had to be careful. If they underestimated humanity even once more, they could find themselves facing a force far beyond what they had ever anticipated. The US Vanguard was just the beginning. The humans had an entire fleet, and each ship held the same terrifying potential. The Zorath could no longer afford to be overconfident. What had started as an observation had now become an existential question. Could they defeat humanity, or had they already lost? The Zorath, determined to test the true strength of the US Vanguard, decided to take action. They gathered a small fleet of their most advanced warships, powerful, heavily armed, and designed for quick strikes. The alien ships moved into position, their weapons powered and shields raised, ready for what they thought would be a swift confrontation. They expected the humans to surrender quickly, or at best, put up a futile defense before falling to the overwhelming might of the Zorath fleet. But as the Zorath approached, they were met with an unexpected calm. Captain Elara Rhodes stood at the helm of the US Vanguard, her face set with determination. She had already anticipated the Zorath's move. With a simple command, the ship's engines roared to life, and the US Vanguard moved into position, ready to engage. The Zorath watched in disbelief as the human warship's shields flared to life, absorbing their first barrage of weapons fire with ease. It was as if the energy blasts had simply vanished upon contact with the ship's defenses. The Zorath had never encountered anything like it. They had expected the humans to fall back, to show signs of weakness, but instead, the US Vanguard stood firm, unmoved, and then, without warning, the human fighters launched. Like a swarm of angry hornets, the small but nimble vessels shot out from the US Vanguard, attacking with lightning speed and precision. The Zorath warships tried to form defensive patterns, but the human fighters moved so unpredictably that their standard tactics were useless. The humans weren't fighting like any enemy the Zorath had faced before. Their strikes were erratic, constantly shifting, as if the humans had no regard for traditional warfare. The Zorath found themselves struggling to adapt to this new form of combat, their advanced systems working overtime just to keep up with the onslaught. They fired energy weapons and launched countermeasures, but the humans were always one step ahead, always finding the perfect opening to strike. Inside the US Vanguard, the command center was a hive of activity. Every officer, every crew member, moved with purpose and precision. There was no panic, no frantic shouting. Instead, there was an air of calm efficiency as they worked together to outsmart and outmaneuver the Zorath. Each person knew their role and executed it flawlessly, their movements synchronized like gears in a well-oiled machine. The Zorath had expected chaos from the humans, frantic, disorganized efforts that they could easily overwhelm. But instead, they faced an enemy who fought with the utmost discipline and coordination. It was a battle of minds as much as weapons. The Zorath were accustomed to fighting with overwhelming force, using superior numbers and firepower to crush their enemies. But these humans fought with cunning, exploiting every weakness they could find, and making the Zorath fleet look sluggish and outmatched. As the battle raged on, the Zorath began to realize the full extent of their mistake. They had underestimated the humans' resolve. It wasn't just their technology or their fleet that made them dangerous. It was their indomitable will to fight. The Zorath had expected the humans to be easily intimidated, to buckle under the pressure of a real confrontation. But instead, they had found themselves struggling to gain any advantage. The humans had not only fought back, they had taken the fight to them. It was a lesson that the Zorath were learning the hard way. The humans were not a species to be underestimated. As the battle reached a boiling point, the Zorath commanders felt a growing sense of unease. The humans weren't backing down, and with every passing moment, it became clearer that this battle wouldn't end the way the Zorath had expected. They had thought the humans would crumble in the face of superior force. But now, the Zorath were the ones on the defensive, fighting an unpredictable and determined enemy. The first test of the humans' strength had turned into a nightmare for the Zorath, and it was one they couldn't afford to lose. The Zorath had expected victory to be swift, but as the battle raged on, something unexpected began to happen. One by one, their advanced warships started to falter. The U.S. Vanguard, a single ship, had already disabled two of their vessels with well-placed, precise strikes that crippled their shields and weapons systems. The Zorath, who had relied on the overwhelming power of their fleet, were now scrambling to regain control, their tactics failing against the humans' unpredictable approach. Every move the Zorath made seemed to be countered with ease by the humans, who adapted to the Zorath's tactics with unsettling speed. The Zorath fleet, once a symbol of dominance, was being dismantled piece by piece, and their commanders began to realize that the balance of the battle was shifting. As the minutes ticked by, it became more and more clear that the Zorath were losing ground. Their rigid military systems, built on structure and calculated moves, were no match for the chaos of the human strategies. The Zorath had never encountered an enemy that fought this way, always shifting, always evolving. Each time they thought they had found an opening, the humans adapted, turning their own mistakes into opportunities. It was unlike any battle the Zorath had ever faced. And then, just as the Zorath began to panic, a voice crackled over the comms. Captain Elara Rhodes' calm, steady voice. "This battle isn't over," she said, "but you're not just fighting one ship." The words echoed through the Zorath fleet, striking fear into their commanders. In that moment, they realized with horror that the U.S. Vanguard was not alone. Out of the shadows of an asteroid belt, dozens of human warships emerged, their sleek, formidable forms rising into view. The Zorath had only seen a fraction of humanity's strength, and now the true scale of the threat was becoming clear. These ships were part of a much larger fleet, one that the Zorath had never anticipated. The hidden force was ready to engage, their weapons powered and shields up. The Zorath could only watch in stunned disbelief as the battle transformed from a simple skirmish to a full-scale war. The humans had been holding back, waiting for the right moment to reveal their strength. And now that moment had arrived. The Zorath, their superiority shattered, could do little more than brace for the oncoming storm. Captain Rhodes' voice rang out once more, this time with a message that sent a chill through the Zorath commanders. "We have the advantage now. You've miscalculated, Zorath. This is just the beginning." As the human fleet closed in, the Zorath commanders began to realize the full magnitude of the threat before them. They had thought that the U.S. Vanguard was an anomaly, a single ship that could be crushed under their might. But now they understood that humanity was not just a lone ship, not a single force they could easily defeat. The humans had built something much larger, something that could not be ignored. The Zorath, once confident in their ability to dominate the galaxy, were now facing the full force of humanity. And it was far more terrifying than anything they had ever imagined. The battle had only just begun, and already the Zorath were beginning to realize that they had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were about to pay the price for it. As the Zorath fleet retreated into the void of space, their once proud ships limping away from the US Vanguard and its hidden allies, a haunting realization settled over them. The battle had been lost, not by their technology, but by the human spirit. The Zorath had always viewed themselves as the apex predators of the galaxy, a species of immense power that could crush any threat before it even had a chance to grow. Their confidence had been their greatest weapon, but now, as they fled from the humans' relentless assault, that confidence shattered like glass. The Zorath had never encountered a species like humanity. Humans weren't simply a race of warriors, nor were they defined by their weapons or technology alone. What had truly terrified the Zorath was the discovery that humanity was driven by something far more powerful than anything they had previously faced: an indomitable will. No matter the odds, no matter how overwhelming the challenge, humans would always rise. They fought not only to survive but to adapt, innovate, and push beyond the limits of their capabilities. The Zorath had believed they could simply dominate, that the humans would be crushed beneath their superior power. But in the end, the Zorath had underestimated the depth of human resilience. Back aboard the US Vanguard, Captain Elara Rhodes stood at the command center, surveying the retreating alien fleet on the holographic screen. The battle was over for now, but she knew this was only the beginning. As the crew moved through the ship's halls, there was no sense of victory in the air, only resolve. They had sent a clear message to the Zorath, but Rhodes knew that their true work was only just beginning. "We've sent them a message," she said, her voice calm but firm as she addressed her crew over the comms. "But we haven't started the real work yet. This is just the beginning. We'll make sure they understand what happens when they challenge humanity." Her words carried weight, and the crew of the US Vanguard listened intently, knowing that their mission had just escalated to something far larger than they had anticipated. The Zorath, for all their technological might, had learned a painful lesson. Humanity could not be intimidated, not by force, not by power, and certainly not by fear. The humans had just begun to show the galaxy what they were capable of. The US Vanguard and its fleet would be the vanguard of a much larger effort to ensure that no one would ever